Lloyd, can you hear us okay?
Yep.
Thank you.
Are we doing the closed session before the code of conduct conversation or after?
We are only doing the closed session if anybody references that and needs to go into closed session. Calling us to order for governance on November 28th, 2024. I am going to try to promise that this is not going to be a 7-hour meeting this month. I don't make that promise completely, so contact your families and let them know. No, just kidding. We will get started with a roll call, Mr. Westerson.
My pleasure. Acting Mayor Carlson.
Present.
Councillor Schmidt-Rempel.
Here.
Councillor Middleton Hope is on a leave. Councillor Croson.
Present.
And I see your colleague Councillor Dodick has joined us as well. And Mr. Brierley is online as well.
Perfect. I will begin with the acknowledgement statement. The City of Lethbridge acknowledges that we are gathered on the lands of the Blackfoot people of the Canadian Plains and pays respect to the Blackfoot people past, present, and future, while recognizing and respecting their cultural heritage, beliefs, and relationship to the land. The City of Lethbridge offers respect to the Métis and all who have lived on this land and made Lethbridge their home. We move first to the adoption of the agenda. I have a motion from Acting Mayor Carlson Be it resolved that the agenda of the Governance Standing Policy Committee meeting of November 28, 2024 be adopted. Acting Mayor Carlson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Westerson, are there any additions?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Excellent. Any comments by my colleagues?
Let's do it.
Very well done.
Seeing none other than awesome, I will call for the vote.
Question's been called. All in favor? And we have an agenda by unanimous vote. Moving to the consent agenda, I have a motion from Councillor Schmidt-Rempel. Be it resolved that the minutes of the Governance Standing Policy Committee meeting held on October 24th, 2024 be approved, and the Chair and City Clerk designate be authorized to sign the same. And further be it resolved the status of initiatives for November 28, 2024 be received as information. Councillor Schmidt-Rempel.
If there are no questions or corrections or anything like that to the consent agenda, I will call for the vote.
Question's been called. All in favor? And consent agenda passes unanimously as well, which moves us forward to, yes, Acting Mayor Carlson.
Thank you. Just a question on process. We have one member of the committee on leave. Does that affect membership? Like, I'm just wondering for voting and quorum, how that affects the committee. I've never experienced that before. I've had people absent, but somebody taking a leave, do we adjust the committee membership? I'm just not sure how that works.
I know I raised that question to Ms. Hilford and Mr. Westerson. To look at it is if something happens that one more member has to not make it on this and social and safety, how that would affect it. But I think right now quorum is literally 3. It's written as 3. So all 3 of the members that are still on the committee have to be present. We do not have yet a backup plan if something happens to one of the other of those 3 members. And I did suggest that we might look at some kind of wiggle room in the future with that. We do also have, it's written into our own procedure bylaw that by unanimous consent, we can basically do a workaround if all of council has unanimous consent, but it's written that it has to be all of council. It's not written all of committee. So there are a few things like that that we did put in a sale phase, but maybe sale phase. Yeah. We did put in contingencies, but maybe not as many as we need.
Because I was just curious if someone takes a leave, if the committee is reduced to 3 and then quorum would be 2, but that's not how it functions. Okay, thank you.
No. Councillor Dodick, do you have a comment about the same issue or a different issue?
You want to be appointed?
I do not. It just raises an interesting issue, quorum being more than half of the members of the committee. Now, when the committee is fully formed, when there's 4 people here, a 2-2 vote means that a resolution does not pass. When you have 3, does that mean if you have a 2-1 vote because there's 1 person missing, it doesn't pass, or does it pass? And why should it? Based on why SPCs were formed in the way they were. Have fun with that one.
Well, we got to remember, it's not so much that things pass or fail, it's whether it goes forward as a recommended to council or not. So I think you're putting too much emphasis on pass and fail at the
Okay.
SPC.
Did not recommend it, just replace the words.
But then it still goes to full council for a decision one way or the other, and they can choose to go with the recommendation or not.
And then what is the purpose of an SPC?
You want us to have an hour meeting?
Could we do this towards the end under the inquiries and responses? Because I think some of those inquiries and responses will tie in with this.
Got my answer to that one, thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, we're going to move forward to our actual presentations. We're starting with Ms. Hilford, City Clerk, Returning Officer, and David Sarsfield, Deputy City Clerk, 2025 Election Replacement, Election Bylaw, and Provincial Bill 20 Impacts. So Ms. Hilford, Mr. Sarsfield, welcome. I know this is something that the community is looking forward to hearing, and we are as well, what the impacts are and how we are going to work through them. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, members of the committee. Yep, today we're here to present 2025 municipal election, impacts from Bill 20, and amendments to the election bylaw, which is actually a replacement election bylaw. Next slide, please. So just quickly, Bill 20 was proclaimed less than a month ago on October 31st. The bylaw does have impacts from that, and the bylaw needs to be adopted by the end of this year, and nomination period does start January 1st. Next slide, please. So the significant impacts of Bill 20 are the three as listed there. There is a new electors registry, and that is required. Number two, electronic tabulators are prohibited for ballot counting, so hand counting is now required. And the third one, criminal record checks are required with the filing of candidate nomination papers. Now that's optional, and council can decide that by bylaw, again, by the end of the year. So I'm going to turn it over to David right now, and he's going to talk about the electors registry.
Good afternoon. As Ms. Hilford said, it's a pleasure being here to talk about elections because that's near and dear to everyone's heart here because somehow you got here and through the election. So first issue we're going to talk about is the requirement for elector register. This is a new requirement. No municipality in the past has used an elector registry, but it is a new requirement from the province. What we'll be doing is we've entered into an agreement to use the data created through Elections Alberta to create some information through that. We then had to hire, at a cost of $72,000, software manager to deal with the data, and we will have additional staff. So what that means to you physically, if you want to change the slide, is you will have to be on a voter's list before you can vote. Similar to what you would with the province and federal government, we'll be telling people to go to the provincial website to get registered. If you're not registered as of the time of the election, there are provisions to carry through it on that. We're going to be using the data they provide and updating it on a monthly basis, but it is a significant cost to us. Next slide. So we are not sure how it's going to work yet. We are hoping that we'll be able to use the internet. If we're able to use the internet, we'll be having what is called Vote Anywhere during the advance as well as on election day. If we're not allowed to use the internet, what we'll have to do is print off a copy of the voters list, and you will be assigned to a specific voting station on election day, and that's where you'll be required to vote. There are forms to fill out, which is surprising with any election. So you'll have to fill out those forms in duplicate. As I mentioned, we'll need workers, additional workers than required, and it's just going to take more time all around to vote. So that's the first item that we want to talk about, the voters list. Next slide. We're going to now talk about the most exciting part, the hand counting.
Thanks, David. So the city has used tabulators since 1992 with no recounts or with no challenges, and results are typically known within an hour or two of polls closing. So Bill 20 does prohibit the use of automated voting equipment such as electronic tabulators. Therefore, the city will be hand counting. So at large versus ward system of election makes hand counting ballots more complex and more time consuming, where the voters choose more than one candidate, such as for councillors, they'll choose 8, public school trustees, they choose 7, and separate school trustees, they choose 5 from a longer list of candidates for all of them. So we conducted 2 hand counting exercises to test and estimate the time and resources required. Next slide, please. So that's just the process there. I'm not going to go into detail about that. Next slide. This is the tick form that we created, and there'll be 2 tickers that will be recording the ballots as they're called out for the councillors and the trustees. We will actually need, for just the councillors, 1,280 of these forms, because we will have we do them in batches of 50, and then we have 2 tickers for each. Next slide. So this was the 2021 composite ballot. We call it composite because it's all encompassing. The first one is a municipal one on the left, and on the right was a provincial one. So on the municipal one, we had mayor, we had councillor, we had either school, public or separate trustee, and the city also had 2 questions on the ballot. So that was able to be fit on all one ballot. Province is much the same. Next slide, please. So for the 2025 election, we will have a ballot for each of mayor, for council, for public school, and for separate school, and any questions as well for municipal. For provincial, same thing, a ballot for each question. So this is what we used in our mock exercise. This is actually the mayor's ballot. There's a foot ruler there to show you what the size would be. Go ahead, David. Yeah, go ahead. Oh, did I? Yeah, this is councillor. Right. See, I'm getting myself confused. Thanks for that. I appreciate that. Next slide. So this shows the ballot boxes. In 2021, we had 1 tabulator and ballot box together on the left there at each voting station. For 2025, we will have multiple ballot boxes. They'll be color-coded according to the ballots. If we would have had the same questions and everything from 2021 to 2025, we would have had 6 ballot boxes just for municipal, plus I believe 3 for provincial. So that gives you an idea. And that will be at every voting station. So David calculated it, and I believe, and I hope I'm not stealing your thunder, but we had 48 ballot boxes in 2021. We are estimating over 250 ballot boxes will be needed for 2025. Next slide, please. So during our mock exercise of counting ballots, we did we videotaped part of it because we knew that you'd want to see that, and it paints quite a picture. So I'm going to have Stephanie bring up the video, and it's a minute and a half, but it does show quite a bit.
Brown, Sharon, Desi, Dunphy, Genest, Grosso, Janssens, Klumkate, and Kara, Sharon, Laurie, St. Clair, and Brown.
So that
Buchanan.
that was showing you the process for counting 50 councillor ballots. We're estimating approximately 32,000 councillor ballots. We'll also have ballots for mayor and for school. So we're estimating 100,000 ballots. That was 50, and that took 28 minutes, but did not include filing paperwork or filling in paperwork, bundling in batches, entering totals in spreadsheets and breaks and stuff. It's very monotonous work. It's very hard on the eyes. You can see the tick sheet. So there will be breaks and such for people as well. Anything you wanted to add to that, David? No? Okay. So next slide. Oh, there it is. So this was exercise 2. This was results. If you just go to the bottom there, I'm just going to highlight that it actually took 41.6 seconds per ballot to do the entire process. We have 32,000 for councillor. So if you turn the page, it's 370 hours We're going to do teams of 20, counting consecutively of 4 people each. So that's 18 and a half hours, just to count counselor. If you go to the next slide, here's some good news. So mayor, because they are only choosing one person, that goes a lot faster. Next slide. It only took 4.69 seconds per ballot to count mayor, because they're only choosing one. So if you go to the next slide, thank you. It would actually take 80 people 2.6 hours to count the mayor. Next slide, it just shows all the times that it would take to count counselors, the trustees, the mayor, the institutional, and the vote at home. So we did it in 4-hour shifts. We didn't feel people could count any longer than that without a big break. So 11 shifts, 4-hour shifts of 80 people. And you can see the total there, 88,000. This is, again, yeah, this would probably take 4 days of counting. There would be 3 shifts per day. So we're probably looking at starting counting on the Tuesday. We'd have to balance Monday night, because again, everything's paper. And so maybe Friday, we're looking at getting done. This is all estimates, tentative. Next page, please. So to do all the counting, we'd need a counting center that would accommodate the 20 teams. So we need 20 rooms. We found that each team needed a separate room because they're calling out loud and they can't have any distractions or hearing other calling. Accuracy is very key when we're doing this exercise. We need one very large secure room for the 250 plus ballot boxes. We need this counting center to be accessible to scrutineers, and we need it available from Monday night or Tuesday all the way up to Friday. If recount, then longer. Next slide, please. These are just some additional considerations when we did our estimates. Again, it's based on 2021 numbers of 28,000 voters plus growth. So we put 32,000. It could be more, it could be less. If there's a recount or a challenge, the time and cost will increase, of course. The budget does not include any municipal or provincial questions. And the workers can't be expected to work around the clock. They do need breaks, they do need sleep. There's only one of me, one of David. So again, accuracy is key, not speed. Next page, please. So this is the budget of the Bill 20 impacts, or the expenses, I should say, that we estimated. The total at the bottom is 323,000. Next slide. So this is the budget. Again, the Bill 20 impacts were 323,000 that we estimated. Standard election expenses that we have for the election are around 342. That's our estimate. So total expenses would be around 665,000. Funds available total would be around 650. So we're happy to report, as we presented with no additional questions or recounts, no additional taxpayer funds would be required. We can cover it with our operating budget and with reserves, because we've had no by-elections or plebiscites in the last few years. Okay, and now I'm just going to pass it back over to David, and he's going to talk about the criminal record check. Thank you.
So it is the last significant change in Bill 20 that we want to talk about today. Bring you to your attention that in Bill 20, they gave the option to council to decide if they wish to have a requirement for a criminal record check. It's a decision of council. It is also a decision, by the way, of the school boards. They have to decide on their own. So the requirement is you would have to get a criminal record check. You would have to file it at the same time you file your nomination papers. They do say in the act, they just refer to a criminal record check, but if you, depending on jurisdiction, there are different definitions of what that could potentially be. and they give no guidance. When we contacted Municipal Affairs, say, what is a criminal record check? Well, this is what it says in the Act, which says nothing. So it is up to council if they wish to do a criminal record check. The cost currently for us would be about $75. We expect that based on the numbers, there were 38 candidates for mayor and council, so that would be the cost to be. I've been told by the public school board they are not going to proceed with criminal record checks. A separate school has not let me know yet. We would have to include this in the bylaw and pass it by December 31st. The city clerks isn't going to provide any recommendation one way or the other. Whether you should do a criminal record check, we'll leave that decision up to you. Next slide.
So just to wrap up what changes voters can expect for the 2025 election. The voting period will be approximately 9 days between October 8th and October 20th. We are going to have 3 voting stations. We're going to have super stations in lieu of 14 smaller stations that we had last time. And they'll be open all through the election period. So you can go and vote at any of the 3 during any of the times. There won't be any drive-by voting or drive-through voting that we had last time, that we had at the exhibition. Part of that parking lot is no longer available. And with all the ballots in the ballot boxes, the wind and the weather, we decided that wouldn't be a very good idea. And also improperly placed candidate campaign signs will be confiscated for the remainder of the election period. And as we just previously mentioned, you must be registered prior to voting. We encourage everybody to go to the Elections Alberta website and register to vote or update your information by September 30th. Then they will be providing the data, and after that point, you would have to go to the election and fill out a form if you're not on the list. And voters can expect more ballots and more ballot boxes. Of course, we'll have people there to help guide, and the election results will be quite delayed. Thank you. We're open to any questions that you may have.
Thank you both. I don't think there's anyone from the community here to speak to this. I know you did a media scrum earlier, so probably all the questions were asked at that point. So we will then go for questions from council and the committee. And I believe Councillor Dodick is quite eager to ask a question, so we'll begin with Councillor Dodick.
Yes, I have a few and some comments too. You had indicated no additional tax funding. That seems to, if someone was listening to that, they would think that this is not costing anything. But when you say no additional tax funding, in fact, taxpayers' money is being used in this exercise, and that money is significant. And that's what, $339,000?
323, with that we estimate.
All right.
You're absolutely right.
So that's right. So if we did not have to do this, we would not have to spend $323,000 of taxpayers' funds.
That's correct.
Okay. Secondly, the machines that we've been using in the past and for a long period of time, the actual hard copy of the ballot is not magically disappear. It enters into a depository in the machine itself. So if anyone were to challenge an election and say, I want handwritten recounts, and for example, were to go to court and get something like that, those ballots would actually be available, would they not?
Yes, they are. So what we've never had since 89, we've never had any questions about the results. We've never had a recount. We've never had a judicial recount. We've never had to do that. But we are required to keep all those ballots along with other materials for over 90 days. So at any point after the election, they would be available in some regard if we had a court order.
So in other words, the ballots that you would be required to do now versus what we did in the past would still have the same information on them. The difference would be it's a lot cheaper and the counting would be a lot faster. Is that fair to say?
Correct.
Okay, now, in 2020, there were a myriad of lawsuits in the United States dealing with a variety of voting machines. Some of those voting machines did retain the ballots, some did not. Some just were computer things. Nevertheless, there were a number of challenges that went through the court system there all the way up to the Supreme Court, and my understanding is that none of those machines were able to be challenged in terms of not being accurate. And in fact, in one case, a civil lawsuit against a purported news organization ended up in a almost $1 billion civil judgment. So my question is, in the States, the rationale they were giving for objecting to machine counting was that they're not as accurate as hand counting. Has the province of Alberta, has the municipal affairs, the powers that be from the province indicated to us why they're requiring this to do province-wide? Because the only thing I can remember seeing is a comment to the effect that someone heard that some people said that they're a lot more accurate than machines. Do you have any better information than I do as to why they are doing this, the rationale for it?
So our job here is just to follow the legislation. The legislation's been passed, so that's what we're going to be doing.
Got you. The Minister of Technology and Innovation, Nate Globish, was in Airdrie not that long ago. One of the quotes that was attributed to him was, "We lead the government's efforts to apply more technology and innovation in everything we do so that we can deliver better, faster, and smarter services to Albertans, and also do so in a way that saves the taxpayer money." This question is to the Chair of Governance Committee, and that is, we do not have a rationale, at least to my satisfaction. Has there been any consideration given, bearing in mind the election is still approximately a year away, to inviting the Minister of Municipal Affairs and the Minister I referred to, Mr. Nate Globish, to make a presentation to this committee, to Council, or to whoever or whatever SPC they might be comfortable in making such a submission to. And the reason I ask that is because we're told we should be saving taxpayers money. Mr. Nate Globish, in his role as minister, says that technology is important to save money, and now we're going backwards. So is there any appetite from this committee to perhaps defer any decision on this, to send a polite invitation to members of the government, those two specifically, and any else from the government of Alberta that might wish to come here and let us know why they are doing this?
I'm going to provide a process answer and then more of a political answer. The process answer is we have to have the 3 readings of the election bylaw done by the end of December. The information about the cost and everything is just for information, and it is the criminal record check and the 3 readings that would be something we would have to move on. So my recommendation from a motion would be to deal with that motion, and then if this committee wishes to do a separate motion regarding what you have said, that would be for discussion amongst the committee, definitely. And so I would suggest we do it in that step, that we focus first on this motion, and then if there is a motion arising, now process, can a non-member of a committee make a motion arising? I believe so, even if he couldn't vote on his own motion arising, or would he have to get a committee member to make it?
I think it would have to be done by a member of this committee.
Okay, so if a motion arising is going to be made, it would have to be made by one of the members of the committee. And the other thing, from a more of a political answer, I do know many of us have sat in on these discussions with Alberta municipalities. We have put forward many of the same concerns and have worked with the advocacy arm of Alberta municipalities on many of these same things before the bill was passed, and it was not heard, and changes were not made. Or I shouldn't say wasn't heard, changes were not made that Alberta municipalities was requesting. Yes, Councillor Doty.
Were we told what the impetus was with respect to making a criminal background check an optional thing? So I guess the question to me is, it baffles me. And yes, I do get baffled from time to time. But they say, well, you might consider this, but you don't have to. Do we have a rationale as to, well, if you want to, you can, but you don't have to if you don't want to? Do we have a rationale for that?
I will admit, in the discussions I have had, it has focused much more on the counting and all the other things. I have not come across any communication on the rationale behind the records check. I think that will be one of the conversations, one of the discussions we'll be having in our debate about whether or not we want to support it. Some of those conversations will be coming out. Because it doesn't necessarily mean you haven't ever committed a crime. It means you've been smart enough not to get caught having committed a crime. And so it does suggest you're getting smarter people. And so, yes, that's certainly going to be part of the debate about whether or not we expect candidates to pay for it. But no, to answer your question, no, I have not heard a rationale. All right, Acting Mayor Carlson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate Councillor Dowitt coming down. He had many of the same annoyances and questions I did. A couple of my questions may seem facetious, but it is. Should we add a question, even though it means more counting, to our ballots regarding the insanity of the provincial directive to do this? I know. All right.
That would be a question for debate amongst your colleagues,
can we?
not
Yes,
to
we can.
administration.
We could, though, couldn't we? Excellent. The other question I have, what are the fines for non-compliance? Yeah. If we just said we're using our machines, oh, the fine is $80, I'd rather pay that than $329,000. Are there any fines?
We are not recommending that administration break the law.
Damn it, I shouldn't have tipped my hand.
And if you wish to do research into the fines, you may do it on your own, but we're not going to ask administration something about breaking a law.
Well, they obviously would have put some fines in it, or we wouldn't have a council, and like what are the ramifications?
Okay.
Acting Mayor, unsure of any fines, but I'm sure that they would consider our election invalid.
And we would have to do it over again, hand counting.
Oh, crap. Thank you for that. Now on to some more realistic questions, if I can. How have we looked into, because we're a very heavily post-secondary community, how this is going to affect the students and their families who move to Lethbridge in September, trying to get registered and not knowing any of this, especially if they come from out of province. Have we looked into how we're going to try and educate students and try and get them involved in the process,
yeah,
who may be here for the entire term of the election they're voting on?
So because of the requirement to be on the voters list, and there also is an additional requirement which regarding identification. So what we're going to be doing is we put in our budget some additional funds just for reach out to both the college and university, just what's involved, and not just to specifically to those sectors, but to the population at large. We want to make the experience as accessible to all as we can. So we have heavily invested, and we hope in campaign material going out. So
Part of the extra costs that were identified?
I think we put $5,000 towards that specifically.
Thank you for that. And following up on that, and thank you for leading right into the question. You talked about accessible as possible. We have become a much more diverse community. How are we going to deal with folks showing up on election day, if we're allowed to register, up to election day with a multitude of different language barriers, disabilities, hearing, sight, those types of things. Is each voting station going to have much more staff than we've even contemplated? I would hate to turn anyone away.
So first of all, we will have more staff. We're having, as we mentioned, voting superstations. So we'll have more people there and more supplies and different things. We also do offer the option of going to people's houses. We still do that. We also go to approximately 30 supportive living facilities, so those are covered. So this would be no different than any other election. We will work hard to make sure everyone is able to vote.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Oh, final question if I can, then I think I'm done. The criminal records check, it's just a piece of information. It wouldn't preclude if something came back, Carlson was trespassing in 1992. It doesn't preclude me from running, correct?
Correct. So it's just captures at a moment in time. So let's say you were a good boy until today and got your criminal record check done and produced it. That doesn't prevent you from doing perhaps other activities next week.
But if I could add, though, that criminal record check does have to be filed with your nomination papers. Correct. Yeah.
I'm a little worried about how you guys are trying to figure out whether or not to do a crime, Phil. Councillor Schmidt-Rempel.
Thank you very much, Chair Croson. Going off of the conversation that we're just having about criminal record checks, we've heard that they are $75, need to be done 6 months before you submit your paperwork, or 6 months before. It cannot be older than 6 months?
Correct. Cannot be more than 6 months.
Before you submit your paperwork?
Pardon?
Before you submit your paperwork?
Yes.
Okay, so cannot be older than 6 months before you submit your paperwork, okay.
Correct.
What does a criminal record check show?
So it depends on where you
show?
depends on where you get it from. There are many different sources. So what we did try and show is one of the attachments shows an example from the Lethbridge Police Service, which we think the majority of the candidates would choose to get from. So we'll show anything which you've been convicted of, any warrants you may have across Canada, anything, a judicial order that might be into effect. Those are the kinds of things that we'll show.
So Donald Trump's would have been 8 pages long.
So yes, it does show then criminal activity. It's not just a blank form of this person has committed a crime. It actually does list out what that is. Is that ever going to be made public, or is that, how is that going to be disclosed, whether you've committed a crime or not? Or to be disclosed?
So it will show up, it will be there. However, and it is public, but it's not published on the website. The only thing which can be redacted from that criminal record check is the physical address of the individual. Everything else is public, but it would only be upon appointment with the city clerk's office that they could view it.
So that the information that the criminal record check then will be made public to the voting public? No? Okay, so this is what I'm seeking clarification on. Just how are we violating any privacy rules here when somebody gets one done?
Oh, you probably are, but the province has passed it.
Good to know. We're doing
But the
that.
province has passed it. So just like when you file nomination papers, it's signed by a certain number of people. And so I want to know who signed your particular nomination papers. That is public information. The only way that's available, though, is you have to come in and look at it. So just like that with the criminal record check, we won't be posting that on the website or anything, but it is available for individuals to come and look at.
Thank you for explaining that. I appreciate that. Now, going back to the costs, because I think that we need to be very clear to the public that the estimated expenses and total expenses are not $323,000. That is the additional impact that Bill 20 has. So the total cost of this election coming up will be $665,546,000. So we're looking at a total amount of $665,000 with an impact of 223 or 323. So like the total, it's not just 323. That's what we're talking about. That's what the impact is. But for the public to know, this is going to cost us $665,000 this year.
That's correct.
Okay. We have funds available, and thank you very much for exercising the fiduciary responsibility that you do so that we have, I'm looking at $15,000 in savings. If when we look at the funds available, we're looking at $650,000 estimated around there. But moving forward, we're looking at $665,000 to run every election going forward with Bill 20 included.
Yeah, as I mentioned in the report, we would have to top up our operating for the next budget cycle. And I don't know if Mr. Matthews would like to weigh in on that.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Schmidt-Rempel. So that what that means is not only would we have to top it up, but we have topped it up a little bit more above that. So we're ensured that if all of a sudden we do have a plebiscite or something in between that, that there's sufficient funding for that as well. Or for some reason we're a councillor along the journey there that we've had experiences where we had to do a by-election.
Thank you for that, because that means we could be moving into that 700,000 plus range to run elections moving forward with Bill 20 in place. And I think it's important for the public to know that. Next question I have, because we are right now going through a postal strike, how will we handle that if, say, we're going through another postal strike at this time? What implications of a postal strike have on the election being done this way?
So in the past elections, and we're projecting to do the same, is we've given out a guide to the election and we send it out to every household, and that is done through the post office. So that amounted to like 42,000 households that we mailed it out to. We would hope to do the same. If that is not available, we'll have to figure out some other way. So
it impacts our ability to be able to communicate, especially as we're going to paper ballots?
It just means we'll have to do it a different way.
Okay. I've got a couple other questions, but I will step out to allow my colleagues to ask.
Thank you. I have a few questions as well. So the voter list, I mean, we have seen voter lists in the past for federal elections and things like that. On whose server is it sitting? Who is responsible for keeping it private, et cetera, the voters list? So is it on Elections Alberta, like right up until the date? How do we get access to it so that we know at the polling stations who's responsible for the privacy of that list?
So we have a data sharing agreement with Elections Alberta. We are using their information. The agreement says that we have to keep it confidential. There's only 2 people that have access to it. Did you want to add?
Yeah, and so we sign an agreement saying that all the information will be kept confidential. We can't circulate it. And the end result too is, unlike the provincial or federal elections, we do not share that information with anyone else. So if you happen to be a political party in the federal or provincial, you usually got access to it, so you could determine if your people that support you have already voted. In this particular case, they have said no. The only people that get actually the list is those that are working the election, and that's it. And at the end of the election, we destroy all records that we have of it, and we provide updates to the province by next March.
Okay. And does the time you have given for the election, does that presume no challenges? So, right, there might be somebody who's challenging ballots, et cetera. So does the time commitment you have given, how much time you're going to say it's going to do, does that presume that there's no one challenging the ballots at any time?
So you mean the amount of time that we put in for hand counting? Mm-hmm. That's correct, yes. It would, like, we estimate it's going to take us Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and part of Friday to count all the ballots. based on 32,000 people voting.
Just based on counting, but not, so do we have contingency money in case there are challenges? Because we have seen, again, in other countries' elections, et cetera, that there are people who are more abrupt about challenging certain, votes, et cetera. Is that built into any of this, or are we just predicting we're not going to be seeing that?
You can talk.
Okay, so there is a couple of provisions already in the Local Authorities Election Act. Number one is the vote finishes Monday night at 8 o'clock, for those that don't remember that. You're allowed up to 44 hours, which takes you till Wednesday at 4 o'clock to challenge the results, for instance, to request a recount. We don't expect to be done, so that's good if you wish to challenge it. But we do have to have the results, official results, done by Friday at noon. So we're hoping to make that timeline. So if they wish to challenge those results, it would go to court, and then we would deal with that as we can go. So the problem would be just the whole timing aspect of it. So, because we have the swearing in and organizational meeting set for the following Monday, like 2 days after that.
Okay, so we've got it timed the best we possibly can within things we don't control.
Correct.
Okay. And with following up also on the criminal record check, I believe it does, but does this, I can't think of the other term. There's the criminal record check, and then there's the vulnerable sectors check. Does this cover both?
So Calgary tried to do a vulnerable records check as part of their bylaw amendment when they debated this question 2 days ago. They were told that they do not have the authority to do so. The reason being is because in the Local Authorities Election Act, all it says is criminal record check. So it's up to when you go to the police service and say, I'd like a criminal record check, determine if they're going to ask for one from you. So it's not within your power to extend to that or put that requirement in.
Okay, because those are two very different things and give you two very different answers. Okay, thank you. Councillor, Acting Mayor Carlson, you're back in the queue.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You raised an interesting point. Wednesday is the last day for any challenges. We won't be done till Friday, but I thought there was even some provisions in there that if we're within 0.5, it automatically triggers a...
So if you're within 0.5%, so you're running for mayor and you lost by a certain number of votes, if you're within 0.5% of the winning candidate, which in the last election would have amounted to 40 ballots, you could request a recount. It's not mandatory the recount will be done.
Okay, it's not mandatory.
So you're good. You've decided that you're going to let it go, or you could ask for one. Doesn't mean it will happen, but chances are it would.
Okay, and that's for mayor.
Yep.
But
if we're dealing with council...
So once, sorry, David, just to,
Oh, sorry,
so
I
once
should
you're done counting, then if you're within 0.5, you can still request a recount, but that's the only way.
Person who is next in line, yes.
So there's no challenge.
So there's always challenges. You could challenge the process, you could challenge all kinds of things.
Yeah.
But that's a different story.
All right, and that would have to be because you have to do it by Wednesday, then it would go to the courts.
Yes. And that's the reason why we keep all the ballots for that period of 90 days in case there is a judicial, some kind of review of the results because of some alleged fraudulent behavior associated with the process. So our number one goal from the point of view of the city clerks is to run a non-converted election which is not challenged.
Yes. Agreed.
So we're also thinking, because of what David just said, that we would hire an auditing company to audit our processes prior to the election to ensure that they are sound, because the only thing the legislation says is you cannot use electronic devices. It doesn't have any procedures for how to count or any of that. So we just think that we would do some due diligence and have our processes audited to make sure that they're accurate and we haven't missed anything, and to mitigate any recounts or challenges.
Thank you. So it just says you can't use any electronic. Has any company around the world figured out an analog machine that would do the same? Like an abacus versus a calculator?
They also say machines.
Oh, son of a...
Nice try.
Councillor Schmidt-Rempel.
Thank you very much. So for clarification, right now, with regards to the voter registry, we're actually looking at a two-step process for voters. First, they need to go online to register, and then they can come vote. If they don't go online to register, then they need to register at the station, fill out the paperwork, and then vote. So essentially, it's a two-step process for voters to vote.
With regards to the registry?
Yeah, so they have to do the registry first, and then they can vote, but they can't vote until they've done the registry. So it's a two-step process to vote.
For municipal,
For
for
municipal.
council and mayor.
But
School
not
doesn't require it.
not for provincial or federal. Okay.
I'm not sure, what are you asking?
I'm just ensuring actually that our voters know that in order to vote in the next municipal election, they're either going to have to register online or fill out paperwork when they get to the polling station, and then they can vote. So basically, count on a two-step process. Register, then vote.
Yeah. And as Bonnie mentioned,
still have to
it's not
check.
required for schools. So
Right,
if you
it's
only
a-
want to vote for schools, you're not required to be on the voters list.
Okay, all right. And then it's my understanding that they have to be registered by September 30th, 2025, or else they have to fill out the paperwork when they come in to the voting stations?
So we're
the polling
working out all
stations?
the details with Elections Alberta, but from what we understand, their last data dump to us it'll be monthly, and it will be October 1st of 2025.
Okay.
So if you're registered prior to that, and we're thinking September 30th, but we have to understand how long it takes for them to do the data dump.
Okay.
And then after that, it would, yes, come to the election and fill out the paperwork.
Okay. And do we have any indication of when we will know whether staff can be using the internet for the registry?
We don't know for sure. We're still missing a regulation. Not missing, but we haven't received a regulation. It's supposed to be to us by the end of the year. We're hoping, because nomination period starts January 1st.
Okay. So maybe we should hold off on voting until we get that. Sorry, David.
Did you want to add?
Okay. And then one final question before I'll step out here. Do we have a facility in mind? Is there a facility with 20 separate rooms that we can secure over the course of 4 days in order to do this?
David and I have been working very hard on all aspects and thinking. We brought this to ELT, and there's the exhibition. We did take a tour of that. There's also maybe hotels and also City Hall.
Okay. All
Those
right.
are our three options right now. There could be others out there. But for now, that's what we are concentrating on.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, my cue is cleared. I just want to say thank you guys for having such a good sense of humor through this. Having something that's going to double the cost of the election, never mind add a lot more work over the next year, and you've done it with smiling faces, so thank you. Based on a brief conversation with Acting Mayor Carlson, we have shortened the motion because I am feeling the consensus was to remove the need for the criminal record check? Councillor Schmidt-Rempel, did I read the room correctly? Oh,
Yeah, I would be comfortable removing that. Yeah, I would be I would
many
be comfortable.
difficulties
Yeah,
with
there's yeah, and I mean the vulnerable services component of that really should be key to a criminal record check if you are taking public office.
yes.
And anyway,
Okay.
that's where I stand on that. Thank you.
So then we have the motion moved by Acting Mayor Carlson. Be it resolved that the Governance Standing Policy Committee recommend that Council, 1, give 3 readings to Election Bylaw 6473 as provided in Attachment 1 at Council's meeting on December 10, 2024. Knowing that we would have, if they didn't do all 3, we'd have to do a special meeting because it has to be done by the end of December. Acting Mayor Carlson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As annoyed as you probably noticed I am about this, I think it's important to get it done on time, so I would call for the vote, unless there's any further debate.
All right, question's been called. All in favor? Passes unanimously, even though we may think some of it is silly. Oh. All right. We will be moving to item 5.2. So 5.2, if you want to get yourselves organized, I have lost quorum, so we have to wait till they come back. But if you want to just take the seats there, we will go as soon as I get 2 more members of the committee. Okay. Acting Mayor, I hear you have a motion arising. Is it from the last agenda item? It is. Okay.
It was further to Councillor Dodik's comments. Because this is very frustrating, and I see that they've made appearances in other communities. I would motion arising to recommend that City Council, or if the committee can just do it on its own, I'm not sure of how it works, Excellent. And I don't think we should limit it. Thank you, Mr. Westerson, or whoever did the typing. I appreciate it. I not just limited to, and any other interested government officials? Yeah, exactly. Yes, please. No, the minister. No, because there's two ministers, Municipal Affairs and Technology and Innovation. Yeah. Excellent. And I think this would be appropriate. I echo your comments. Our
Oh,
staff.
just a second. Mr. Kilgore and Ms. Maleski, you might as well have a seat again.
Oh, we'll be 2
You might as well
seconds.
be comfy before we invite you back up.
'Cause
I
I-
apologize.
I did
Go ahead, Councillor Carlson.
appreciate your comments about how our staff and administration have done this with a smile on their face, but it is a lot of extra work and a lot of cost to our taxpayers needlessly. I recognize Councillor Dodick read out the Minister of Innovation and Technology letter, a transmission letter or directive from the province, and it was to be better, smarter, faster. And this is the opposite. So I would love to have them down. So unless there's any further comments,
I'm seeing no one in the queue.
I will call for the vote.
Okay, question's been called. All in favor? Okay.
Thank you.
We will ask the mayor to send such a letter. Now, you recognize that would not get to council till the 10th, which is when we'd be, so. You shut yourself off.
I know I did. And I see that. I should have asked this while we were in debate. We are recommending 3 readings.
Yes,
That has to be unanimous at council.
we are recommending it, but that is completely council's decision
Exactly.
whether or not it is. All we can do is present to them the reason for why they might wish to do it that day, but council and each individual councillor can make whatever decision they choose.
And at the risk of seeing Ms. Hilford's or Mr. Sarseal's head explode, what happens if it's not unanimous? If it's not unanimous at council, we don't get 3rd reading until January 20?
Yeah, we do a special meeting, I would assume.
Yeah, it would go to the next meeting scheduled, which would be January 19th, unless you do have a special.
And so
So
that
we would
could
have-
just delay us being able to have anyone who wishes to file nomination papers January 1st to that date, correct?
Yeah, I would say, yeah, we'd have to delay that process.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay. Now, I am just going to reconfirm, there's no more motions arising. Everybody is happy, we're done that agenda item? Sorry, Madam Chair. Okay. Mr. Kilgore and Ms. Maleski, if you wish to come back up, we will move on to the Land Use Bylaw Renewal Phase 2 Public Engagement Plan. I feel like we've heard about this before, but love to hear about it again. Ms. Gearing, is there anything you want to say in advance, or are we just going to hand the floor to these? Okay, perfect. Ms. Maleski, the floor is yours.
Everyone, we're pleased to be back with the Land Use Ballot Renewal Project. Today we're discussing Phase 2 of this initiative. Next slide, please. The presentation today will cover background information, an overview of Phase 2 Public Engagement Plan and timeline, and a recommendation for the committee. The Land Use Bylaw Renewal Project involves the review and rewrite of the current Land Use Bylaw 6300. The last time this was written originally was 1987, so almost 40 years ago. So this is an exciting opportunity. The land use bylaws across Alberta have a purpose, and the purpose is to regulate all development in private land. So this means that land use bylaw regulates development by introducing a set of uses and districts, as well as development standards that regulate elements like density, parking, building height, and many others. The land use bylaw is an impactful document because it shapes how the city grows and how community members meet their everyday needs. The Land Use Bylaw Renewal Initiative is an opportunity to write a new land use bylaw that supports economic development by making it easier for business owners to open businesses, grow their businesses, and adapt if needed. The land use bylaw also can increase the housing types residents have access to, and it can also ensure that Lethbridge remains business-friendly by reducing red tape that is associated with development in Lethbridge. Throughout the delivery of this project, there have been several touch points with council and SPCs. At the November 2020 budget deliberations, the item C5.5, Operating Budget Initiative, was approved, and just over $1.5 million were allocated to this project. Along with the funding, council directed staff on how to deliver this initiative. This included and led to a two-phase approach. The first phase would look at social uses. The second phase focused on all other uses and related matters. The project team began working on this project in early 2023, and throughout that year, there were two updates to SPCs. These updates related to progress on phase 2 and the related engagement efforts. On February 27th, 2024 of this year, the project team brought forward Bylaw 6437 in efforts to wrap up Phase 1. This bylaw introduced several amendments to change the way the land use bylaw regulates social uses. At this meeting, the first reading was postponed or canceled, actually, and staff was asked to incorporate the proposed amendments into the new land use bylaw, which at the time was projected to be ready in 2026. The most recent touch point was March 28, Governance SPC. At this meeting, the project team brought forward the engagement plan for Phase 2. Discussions on this matter were postponed, and that leads us to today. We have an updated engagement plan for your review. With knowledge of how we got to today, I'd like to share with you the overall project timeline, and I'll draw your attention to the item at the very bottom of the diagram, New Land Use Bylaw Engagement Phase 2. The material we're submitting today and your guidance on the New Land Use Bylaw engagement plan will help us be prepared to deliver engagement starting in January of 2025. Following the engagement, there will be a writing period, and the output will be a new land use bylaw draft. Once this is completed, we will bring it out back to the community for additional feedback and engagement. The feedback will be implemented to the highest possible extent, and once an updated draft is ready that reflects the feedback of the community, we'll bring it back to council for a council decision process, and this will include a first reading and a public hearing. It is expected that we'll be reaching this milestone in Q1 of 2027. The remainder of the presentation focuses on Phase 2 engagement, and I'll pass it on to Mr. Kilgore to provide the details.
So the full public engagement plan for Phase 2 is in your agenda package. So I'll just go through kind of a few highlights for you. But essentially, this is very similar to the version that was brought to you back in March. However, in the intervening time, we met individually with all council members and then as a group for a workshop in October. And everything that we heard from council has been incorporated into this updated version. So the first highlight is the engagement objectives. So we're looking at splitting Phase 2 into two sub-phases, if you like, 2A and 2B. So 2A would be higher level, more kind of general engagement with the public about their vision. And then Phase 2B is when we come back to the public with some more specific proposals to get their feedback on those. These are the topics that we'll be covering. So we have named these to be in what we think is kind of an accessible way for people to identify which topics they want to take part in engagement on. And then we'll be looking at all these topics through these engagement lenses, which relate to the goals of the overall project. So for example, red tape reduction is one of our goals, and that applies to numerous topics that we'll be engaging on. These are the activity or the methods that we'll be using to engage people. So very similar to the first phase of this project, where we did everything from in-depth workshops to quick online surveys and pop-up engagement. And this is the timeline for phase 2. So we're looking at starting around about mid-January. So once people are through the Christmas and New Year season, kids are back to school and so on, and people might be ready to get involved in something like this, we'd start our engagement then. That would run till about the end of March. We'd then have a bit of a pause in terms of the public-facing work, and we'd be behind the scenes looking at all of that feedback from phase 2A and producing our content for phase 2B, where we get into more specific proposals for people. We'd then do that phase 2B work in June, and at the end of that, we'd wrap up the public engagement for now, and we'd be producing the What We Heard reports for Council. We'd be looking to have another workshop with Council at that time to get more specific feedback and directions from Council about what we will be writing into the new draft land use bylaw. Then we have our communication methods that we'll be using. So one to highlight here is the citywide address mailing, which was one of the inputs from Council they'd like to see. So we do have that underway. And then looking at how this affects the overall project timeline, as Genesis mentioned, due to the pause this year on the phase 2 public engagement plan, that pushes back the completion of the project into 2027, as you can see here. Once we start writing the draft new land use bylaw at the end of next year, we will, of course, have an election and a new council. So we will be orienting the new council to the project and obviously seeing if they have any specific direction for us in this project as well during that period when we're writing the new land use bylaw. So the engagement plan has been designed to comply with our public engagement policy. And of course, the content of this plan is really just about how we go out and talk to the public right now. It's not involving any decisions at this point in terms of what the content of the new land use bylaw would be. So our recommendation is that the committee recommend that Council approve this plan. And we do have our engagement consultant available on Teams as well if there's any questions for them.
Thank you both very much. Again, I am going to assume there's no one in the community, in the public here to speak to this or to ask questions. Not seeing anyone in the audience who is not city staff. All right, we will move then to questions. Starting with, Councillor Schmidt-Rempel was faster than Councillor Carlson. Go ahead.
Getting old.
Getting old. Thank you very much, Chair Croson, and thank you very much, Ms. Molesky and Mr. Kilgore, for the presentation and your work on this particular initiative. I do have a few questions, and then I will step out and let Councillor Carlson step in. Looking through the public engagement piece that you sent us, starting out with, I'm looking at page 131 of the package. About halfway through, it's the City of Lethbridge scale of public engagement. I just want to make sure we're talking about the same page.
Do you have a page number from the public engagement plan?
I think it's 54 of ...
Is it the clean version, the red line version?
Oh, this is the red line version. I'll be working from the red line version. Yeah, and it's page 131 of the agenda package.
Page 6 of the red line version, I believe.
I'm just looking at page 131 of the...
Did I get the right one?
Is it yellow?
It's labeled under 1.3.5, the City of Lethbridge scale of public...
Yeah, it's page 6 of the red line version.
Page 6, okay. Under the first column there, we've got promise to the public, and under the last column of empower, we say we will implement what you decide. I'm concerned about the expectations that sets for the public, just given some of the other engagement pieces that we had that I'm right now getting phone calls on, where the public has said, you did not implement what I decided and what I've stated. And I'm just wondering, if we need to look at that and make it clear to the public that we might not implement what they decide because we're collecting a lot of information and we're engaging with a lot of members of the public. Plus, we have other considerations that we need to take into account as we're building this out. So I'm concerned that this is a promise we're making to the public that we can't keep. So I just, if somebody can answer that, or at least bring that to your attention.
Thank you for the question, Councillor. So the diagram there is the IAP2 spectrum of public engagement. So there's the different levels from inform to empower. For this project, we're not operating in that realm of empower.
Okay.
So for some types of engagement, we might be using consult or involve, for example. Empower would be, as you say, putting the decision-making power in members of the public. So we're not using that level.
Okay. So yeah, just so that we can be clear on that we're not implementing everything that the public provides feedback on this for. Now, being along that line, how will resident involvement be maintained, and how are we going to report back to the residents on the engagement that they've undertaken? So knowing that we get people getting tired of us always asking questions and surveying them, and we want to maintain the level of engagement, particularly in this largest bylaw rewrite. How are we going to maintain that engagement so that they know where the decision making is at and where their feedback is being implemented in the decision making process? It's a big question, but I do ask.
Thank you for the question. So we're using communications and engagement together to try and set expectations accordingly. We have an email newsletter, for example, where we try and keep people updated on how the project's going and when they can next have their say. We will be releasing the What We Heard reports as soon as they're ready. So, for example, for Phase 2A, there'll be a What We Heard report just for that subphase. And as soon as that's ready, around about April, that will be published on the project website on Get Involved Lethbridge. And then same for Phase 2B as soon as that's ready. And then those will be submitted together to council as well. So we're just trying to kind of make sure that people are brought along for the ride. In early January, just before the engagement activities would kick off, we will have kind of a launch of the phase. So we'll have videos that are being worked on right now that will go live, press releases and so on, just to try and get people excited about the project. We're also hoping that the door-to-door mail-outs would go out in January as well, just to kind of raise awareness among the general public.
Thank you very much for that. Just knowing that this is such a large bylaw rewrite, and we are going to need to maintain that interest throughout the whole of the rewrite with the public so that they feel heard. Thank you very much.
Acting Mayor Carlson, your questions, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate the work. Also appreciate taking the time to interact with this committee, as well as all of council, and take the feedback and thoughts and considerations into preparing this. I appreciated that quite a lot. Further to Councillor Schmidt-Rempel, I guess my question really is around the shareholders and the stakeholders and the key stakeholders. We talk a lot in this about the how. I'm curious about the who, and as I think Councillor Schmidt-Rempel talked about, keeping the who engaged for what looks like a 2-year. Engaged in the what? Yes. How do we engage the who in the what? For what's a 2-year process is going to be challenging. So getting the right who's is important. Could you maybe talk just a bit about the who's, because there are the stakeholders, and then there's the key stakeholders, and I was just unclear. Is there going to be like one steering committee of the key stakeholders that are there from day 1 to day 482? I think I just need a little bit about the who and the how.
Thank you for the question. We will not be having a steering committee. So all stakeholders will be considered key stakeholders. So we'll be engaging them to the highest possible extent through a few different tactics. So we first begin by ensuring we have an updated contact list for each one of them. And so right now, we're actively reaching out to every stakeholder we have identified in various sectors to make sure we're contacting the right person at the right contact email or phone number. An additional question they're receiving and having to answer is, are there any other organizations that you think should be involved? So in that way, we're not just tapping into what we know, but tapping into their networks. Beyond that, we have a few tactics that will enable us to maintain a relationship moving forward. One of them is attending their board meetings and meeting with their membership if they wish for us to extend that. And so we are being thoughtful about how we're managing contact information and then also how we're engaging them.
And thank you for that. I guess that sort of answers my question about key stakeholders, because those are more formalized organizations and groups, and we can. One of the comments in the documents, I'm trying to remember where it was, but it intrigued me. It was about the residents and how every one of them has unique needs and unique things they can offer. And I'd like to see how those folks, because a lot of the conversation around the table has been that engagement is great, but it's not statistically valid, because we talked to these 8 people and hoped they represented the community, whereas we all know my neighbor never heard and my other neighbor never heard, and so they don't support it. I know you can't get everyone, but is there a way, and maybe it's one of the key stakeholders, is neighborhood associations, those type of things, so we keep getting those people in. But I guess without a formalized steering group or comprised of community members, I see the risk of people popping in and out as their interest peaks and wanes, and very little consistency. Is there any way to avoid that?
Thank you for the question. Yes, so we want as many people as possible to be involved, and we recognize that different people have different availability and capacity to be involved. So some people will just fill out a 5-minute online survey, and that's all they'll ever do or want to do. Some people have the time and the inclination to, and the means to come down to City Hall and sit through a 2-hour workshop. And that's what we saw in phase 1. So if we can provide all these different types of options, including, us getting out to where people are, like in phase 1, we did 10 pop-ups. So we went to 2 different food banks, library, a couple of grocery stores, a couple of senior centers, and so on. We would set up with a big table and a banner and a bunch of engagement materials and talk to people, fill out surveys for them if we needed to. Just any ways like that we can reach people who maybe wouldn't have the time and inclination to come down to a formal event at City Hall. So we use all these different methods to try and reach people, and all these different communication methods to reach people, social media advertising, for example, and even if we can only just get one touch point with them, is better than nothing. But certainly, as you say, we can't kind of force people to be involved the whole way through.
Thank you. Just as something to throw out there, when we do the data collection, like when we do the surveys, et cetera, do we keep the data and do we group it by postal code or neighborhood? So, because one of the questions I heard is, well, no one from Tudor Estates, no one from Agnes Davidson participated in this, so it's not valid. Is that something on people's mind, that so we can show that, yeah, we had participation from the entire community, is that something we can do?
That is really easy to do with surveys, and so we'll certainly apply that to that type of engagement. For workshops, it's also something we can incorporate because we're having engaging conversations. For pop-ups, we're having brief conversations, and asking for where they live just takes time from that interaction. So we have to prioritize having those meaningful conversations, but we can definitely implement that tool to make sure we know that there's coverage in terms of where feedback is coming from.
And thank you.
Before you continue, Ms. Gearing, you want to add to that?
So if I could, Councillor Carlson, I think the addition of the citywide mail-out at the very beginning of the project will go quite far in terms of getting that awareness out to the city. As Mr. Kilgore spoke, it is hard for us to make people participate, but certainly the awareness will be there citywide in order for them to, if something piques their interest, a postcard sort of a format, something they can put on their fridge, and that will have the email and the website address for the project. And so by that way, we're hoping people will stay engaged as well. So.
And thank you. I appreciate that it'll go citywide, but we may not get active participation. And it would just give us more, in my mind, if we collected the data and go, okay, nobody in Agnes Davidson has, let's do another mail out, or let's do a pop-up at Agnes Davidson School. So because I think nothing better for me personally, I won't be here, but showing a map with all the dots of who engaged around our community would go leaps and bounds of saying, we covered our entire community. So I'm just spitballing things I've heard from my colleagues over the years about, did everyone have a chance? Did everyone have their voice heard? So thank you.
Councillor Schmidt-Rempel.
Thank you very much. When we look at the key engagement topics, and again, I'm looking at the red line version on this, and we're talking about neighborhood housing types. We talk about, and this is a new addition, and based on the feedback you would have received from council, the land use bylaw renewal will not include adding new uses to low-density residential districts, but will look at whether whether uses should be permitted or discretionary and in what circumstances. So the example used is the project will not look at making fourplexes an allowable use in low-density residential districts, but will look at whether secondary suites should be a permitted use in certain circumstances rather than discretionary as they currently are. Does that mean then that fourplexes would be completely removed from that discussion, or would they become discretionary in those areas?
Thank you for the question, Councillor. So the feedback that we had from council in the one-on-one meetings and the workshop was that there wasn't support to make really large changes to our kind of lowest density residential districts. And so we wrote this language in specifically for some comfort for council that we weren't going to look at, for example, allowing 4 homes per parcel citywide. And so that's what that really refers to. So currently a fourplex is not an allowable use in the RL district, and so we wouldn't be looking at making it either discretionary or permitted.
So it would be completely pulled out.
I think Ms. Gearing also wants to contribute to this.
It wouldn't be pulled out, Councillor Schmidt-Rempel. It's not currently allowed.
Okay, but it still could come forward as a discretionary use.
No.
It wouldn't ever be able to?
No.
And it can't now?
Correct.
Okay, perfect. And then my question to follow up on that would be for neighborhood commercial, although home occupations are common in residential neighborhoods, does that also then apply to those commercial? Would that be looked at the same as fourplexes, not allowed and won't be included in that discussion either?
You're referring to
It's just the next page after that. So it's the discussion of neighborhood commercial.
Right. So one of the topics we'll cover with people is, their kind of vision for their neighborhood, what types of commercial uses they would like to see in their neighborhood, if any. So is there a level of support for allowing small retail stores, for example, in your neighborhood, perhaps in certain locations, like on busy roads, that type of thing? And that's one of the types of things we'll explore through engagement, see what level of support there is. It may be that there's no support for it, and then we wouldn't propose any changes.
Okay. Yeah, no, yes, to some part that does answer the question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's cut right through this, and whether you want to answer it or Ms. Gearing, is it true that regulations such as zoning, parking requirements, et cetera, are one of the biggest barriers in North America to building more housing that would actually get affordable housing and get people into housing?
So I'll take that one, Ross, if you don't mind. That's correct, Councillor Crowson. Just last week, we met with a couple of developers in regards to a project where they would see some multifamily housing come in. The parking requirement was a barrier for them. They weren't looking at applying for a waiver. They were looking at more of an accommodation from us, and unfortunately, without doing the waiver, there's no way to do that unless we went through a rezoning situation. So parking is something that we really want to have a good discussion with the community about. We are looking at doing perhaps homes for people and not homes for cars, but I guess we'll have that discussion and explore that topic.
Is it equally true that if we want to create economic opportunities for many of our residents, that looking at the land use bylaw and the regulations and barriers that we have in that is something we need to be discussing?
We hear from businesses all the time about problems with parking, with some of our setbacks, with our landscaping requirements, the signage. There's definitely needs to be an overhaul in terms of our commercial and industrial districts if we want to encourage those businesses to come to Lethbridge and see value here.
And is it not also true that if we want to move forward with this 40-year-old bylaw that is holding up housing and economic development, that a requirement of our colleagues is to do this thorough engagement with the public, and we should just get moving ahead on it? You don't have to answer the last part, but yes.
We would like to start with the engagement. It is the most labor-intensive part, other than the actual authoring of the bylaw. But yeah, we think the time is right. We've certainly heard enough from the business sector and the development sector about things that we need to do that other communities are doing and we need to keep up. And I think that's where we want to position Lethbridge, is to be competitive and at the same time respect the community values that are held here.
And is it also true that every time somebody comes to us with a zoning, taking a chance, it's $5,500 and they don't get it back if we say no?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from committee? Okay. All right. I have a motion from Councillor Schmidt-Rempel, Land Use Bylaw Phase 2 Public Engagement Plan. Be it resolved that the Governance Standing Policy Committee recommends that Council 1 approve the Land Use Bylaw Phase 2 Public Engagement Plan, PEP, as provided in Attachment 1. Councillor Schmidt-Rempel.
Thank you very much, Chair Croson, and thank you again to Ms. Molesky, Mr. Kilgore, and Ms. Gehring for bringing this forward and all the hard work that the team has done on this. It is no small task, so thank you very much. In 2023-2026 operating budget, Council approved Initiative C 5.5 Land Use Bylaw Update. This envisages a comprehensive rewrite of the city's land use bylaw over the next 3 years. The land use bylaw renewal project will be delivered in 4 phases. This report is part of phase 2. And it's coming forward, we need to get moving on this, and we need to start rewriting this land use bylaw so that we can fulfill the needs of our business community as well as our residents, and bring some much needed business advancements as well as housing advancements to our community, and make sure that everybody is getting what they need and we are building spaces for everyone to belong in our city. And with that, if there is no questions or debate, I will call for the vote.
I am going to do a bit of debate because I don't know. I think I'm passionate about this one. This is something we need to keep moving along. Absolutely, we have to have this public engagement and talk to our community, but we are not going to see more housing built. We're not going to see affordable housing because it is supply and demand. We need the housing built. We know by the number of apartments we're seeing that there is an increasing need for building and getting houses done in this community. And the public engagement plan is part of that. I'm glad to see this back now on committee and council's agenda. And I am hoping that we can keep this moving and get this engagement done. I will absolutely be supporting this. I would have liked this done last year, but okay, I'm okay. And with that, I will call for the vote. Oh, Councillor Carlson, please go ahead. Oh, no.
Amen.
All right. Question has been called. All in favor? And that passes unanimously. Thank you all to your team. And now we see what code of conduct bylaws we've been breaking. I mean... Welcome, Mr. Hill, your General Manager, Customer Service and Corporate Performance. And yes, thank you for letting us postpone this from the last meeting. That was a long agenda, and unfortunately, we couldn't get to everything. So we are looking again at the Council Code of Conduct bylaw. I know you and legal have been looking at this quite in depth, and we will get a presentation on it today. So, Mr. Hillier, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, members of Governance SPC, and thank you for having me back. I'm happy to be here today to talk with you about the updated proposed amendments to your Council Code of Conduct bylaw. Next slide. So why are we here today? Conversation started with you back in July, where we were referred back to do a little bit more research, which included meeting individually with each of you to solicit feedback on what you wanted to see in the Code of Conduct bylaw. What I will tell you, was able to have conversations with every member of council, and the individual feedback that was received from members of City Council was compiled and reviewed with our legal services team, and we included as much of this feedback as possible into the drafts before you here today. Next slide. So what are the proposed amendments on here? You'll see some of the highlights which were also highlighted in the report that was included. Next slide. So there are two versions that you would have saw attached to your agenda package. As I had said in my presentation back in July, Lethbridge is one of the only larger municipalities in Alberta where any person cannot make a complaint. And our recommendation at that time was to include that change. However, as we started to look at the process on that a little bit more, we realized that the Integrity Commissioner was an integral part of any person being able to file that complaint. It's not to say that it couldn't, but it put a lot of onus on council, and from a procedural fairness, we decided to essentially break it as you would see here, where version 1 would include an Integrity Commissioner and the ability of any person to submit a complaint, and the second version would be without both of those items. What I can say as well from the individual one-on-one sessions is that there was really no consensus on this. There were definitely members of council that were strongly in favor of an Integrity Commissioner, others that were strongly in favor of not having an Integrity Commissioner, as well as a lot of interest in what you will see on the next slide, which is the idea that was presented at Alberta Municipalities, which is the concept of a provincial Integrity Commissioner. And as identified on the slide here, that resolution was passed at the fall Alberta Municipalities meeting. What I would say, and I know that you're all aware of this, but what I would state today is just because that was passed at Alberta Municipalities does not mean that the provincial government will, in fact, move on those actions or recommendations from Alberta Municipalities. Next slide. So again, before you today is the decision to bring forward one of the proposed amendments for first reading at the next City Council meeting. And with that, I'm happy as well. I do have Mr. Faust here today to answer whatever questions you may have.
Oh, there will be questions, I have no doubt. Once again, I don't see any members of the public here to ask any questions, so we will move to questions of committee. Okay, Councillor Schmidt-Rempel. Oh, they don't have a motion. What the motion is the recommendation of us. So we will have to draft the motion. The other ones are removing the status of directed resolutions, etc. So at this point, as you know, council is kind of half on one side and half on the other. The smartest thing was to leave it to us to come up with the recommendation instead.
And we're just recommending which one?
Which
Process
one,
question.
or are there amendments we want to make to one? Please don't say you want a third option.
No, I'm just
Okay.
process questions as far as this goes.
Yeah.
So process question. So we pick one. and then we look at moving it forward to the first reading, do we have an option to work, or an opportunity to work through that one then for any other changes we may want to see? And does the public have an opportunity to provide feedback on that particular bylaw?
Well, they would have had the opportunity if they had been here today to provide opportunities on either one.
Won't be like a public hearing?
No, it does not require a public hearing.
Okay.
If you think there is the need, we can always, after first reading, recommend it come back to governance if you want to put another loop into it. There would be nothing process-wise from stopping us from doing that. Would I be in a, I don't see anybody arguing with me. I know it's not normal, but if somebody really wanted that, we could do it by process.
Certainly could kick it back after a first reading. It would just lengthen the time at which, before council would eventually approve it, potentially.
Yeah, so it's a possibility if that is felt as a need. In general, though, we would recommend it go to first reading, and then it would be completely in council's hand, and there would be no more engagement with the public required.
Okay. Yeah, so I would certainly, where I'm sitting right now is I would like to see the code of conduct that includes the integrity commissioner go forward to council, but then after it goes forward to council for that first reading, I would like to see it come back to governance just for a sober second look to make sure that we have no further changes before we move that forward or other questions.
Okay.
That's just where I stand on that. And then
All right.
I will step out for now, but I do have another question.
Okay, Mr. Westerson is sort of taking that to add to a potential motion, and we will move on to Councillor Carlson. Councillor Carlson, floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. One of the things when we've talked about this with our colleagues is I guess with the integrity commissioner, are we trying to find a solution to a problem that doesn't exist? In my time on council, I think, and I've been here a long time, I think we've had two of these investigations go forward, and they were handled fairly quickly and easily. So I guess what is spurring the need for this?
And thank you for the question. For clarity, the need for the update to the code of conduct or the need for the integrity commissioner?
The integrity commissioner.
Yeah, so I'll start with that, and if anyone from legal would like to add further comments, please do step in. So the idea of having any person be able to submit a complaint, again, as I had identified previously, the city of Lethbridge is one of the few larger municipalities, and I would actually potentially say the only one, as Medicine Hat recently has went forward with that. But one of the few where any person cannot make a complaint. And as we were drafting the bylaw, the updates to the bylaw, what we realized is from a procedural, both a procedural fairness or at least a perception of that from the public, as well as the time constraint potential for city council if it was opened up to any person. We felt that the integrity commissioner was integral if we did look at having any person make a complaint. So again, I don't want to guess at the number of complaints, but one would expect that if we opened it up to the general public to be able to submit a complaint against this, that we would see an uptick in complaints. And that's not to say that those would be substantiated. They could be frivolous, and an integrity commissioner would quite simply, move those aside and say, you know what, there's nothing here. Whereas that would become much more difficult for city council to do that themselves. So when we started to look at again, the procedural fairness, that perception of conflict, the integrity commissioner became a critical component of having any person be able to submit a complaint.
Okay, thank you. And That helps me out. I guess one of my concerns is that doing these changes does open up for a lot of frivolity. And what is the cost on average? Like if somebody was had an axe to grind against council as a whole or an individual councillor, and once a week submitted a complaint that would then have to go forward to the investigator, the integrity commissioner, what does that cost the corporation?
So what I would say to that, again, if the complaints were frivolous in nature, very little time or effort, from my understanding, would be spent on those. It's where a significant amount of time and effort would be spent is if an active investigation did need to happen. You know, and when we've done research in some of the other municipalities, and those that do post, again, Red Deer and Medicine Hat being new to the game there, but you know, looking at Calgary in 2023, they had posted their integrity commissioner report, 62 complaints with 8 investigations. So again, a lot of those would have been able to have been moved through the process quickly because there wasn't anything substantial to the complaint there. Again, it's where the investigations take place where the costs would add up. And again, a lot there would depend on the complexities of the investigations.
And thank you, Mr. Hilliard. Do you have the cost though? Like 62, only 6 were investigated. What did the 56 cost? Because, I mean, we talked earlier about, you know, trying to put our minds into a devious person's mindset. And if I wanted to, I could submit a 6,000-page report of my complaint. And if an investigator had to read, and if I did that weekly, it's an hourly charge, I'm assuming. And I don't want to give anyone ideas, but it could be done. And that is one of my concerns, is that right now we're not getting.
Do you think we're that interesting? Somebody wants to do that?
Do you want the name?
I agree with you.
Yeah. I got 3 yesterday that I had to read, and it takes my time. I don't charge the corporation by the hour. So I'm just wondering if, I would love to know the costs. Even if it's an hour a complaint, awesome. But what does that cost us? I see Mr. Lowen is.
Ultimately, we'd have to go out to market, and the market would set that rate. It'd be some kind of cost, but in evaluating those things, what I'd invite the committee to think about is, imagine that same person doing that same thing, except instead of an investigator doing it at maybe 150 or maybe 350, somewhere in that range, council would be reading the 6,000-page report and having to make that decision. So it's not, you have to look at, when you're considering those contingencies, both options and the impact that those hypotheticals would have on both sides of the equation.
Okay, thank you for that. Appreciate that. Final question I had. Do all of these versions, I think, contain the same? Can somebody explain the reasoning behind section 14.3 and what exactly that means? Oh, thank you. Frivolous.
It's the honorarium of BCCs.
Yes.
If you want to have any answer for Councilor Carlson?
So that was added in. Again, it was referred from council to be considered in the Code of Conduct update, hence why it is there. The second part of it, so the fact that they shall not receive that was part of the resolution through the individual feedback that I had with you. One of the things, which is the second part of it, was to provide clarity that was in reference to boards, committees, commissions that you're sitting on as a representative of City Council, not as yourself. So, I mean, if you got elected to a committee for Alberta municipalities and there was, things there or other committees not as appointed by council or that you were doing out of personal interest, that wouldn't be included within those restrictions. It was specific to those where you are being appointed as in your professional capacity as a city councillor.
Okay, and which leads me to my question around that. We have two organizations that do pay honorariums right now, Lethbridge Housing Authority and Green Acres Foundation. Sitting on those is not a council representative. It's a council appointed position. And so I'm just curious how that would play into it. If you sit on those organizations, you're not there representing council. Council has one spot to appoint. They can appoint a citizen, they can appoint a councillor, they can appoint a administrator to those. It has to be a councillor, yes. But it's just interesting because and I've had these discussions with both organizations, the fiduciary duty when you arrive on those organizations is to take off your council hat and do the best for the organization. You're not there trying to do the best for the city. So it's a weird place to be in. And I'm curious about the consideration on that.
I'd invite Mr. Faust of our office to come up and together with Mr. Hillier to speak to that. He's the member of our office has done the legal research into the other departments in much more detail and worked on these amendments. I can explain what those words mean, but I don't know the rationale of the policy decision behind, why it's a good idea to be in there, and I'd leave that to Mr. Hillier to discuss. But Mr. Foss would be able to talk about whether there's comparator language in other bylaws, those kinds of things, and maybe why we've included it.
Who am on? Yes, and in this clause, if I recall, it came from a previous resolution from 2023, which was to refer this back, which was the council would not receive honorariums for their work on the committees. And as Mr. Hillier said, through the discussions with yourselves, the question arose, but what about my personal capacity? For your example, I think if we were going to look at this, but what we're trying to cover what hat you're wearing. So it's clear what hat you're wearing when you're appointed as a member of council. But for Green Acres, when you say you're not there thinking about the city's best interests, which you may be if you're a council member on EDL or something, you're there for Green Acres. And I think that would be the consideration for the test. But I do think that there's an opportunity for maybe some clarifying language further.
And I appreciate the discussion, because I don't know about other organizations. I know we've had representatives on FCM, AUMA. I don't know. We've had provincial representation as well. And while council doesn't appoint, we wouldn't be a part of those organizations if we weren't a councillor. Right? Yeah. So I'm wondering the rationale of putting this in at all, if it was just for council's consideration. I think we all understand that, yeah, if we sit on a council created or a council mandated board, we don't, even though we pay the other members of those committees an honorarium, that we don't collect those. So I'm just, and that I think is in the honorarium policy. So I don't know if it's just added for no reason.
And I can add that administration doesn't have a recommendation that this clause be inserted or be maintained in here. It was put in because of the previous resolution that had it kind of outstanding and needing to be addressed. So that's why it's been put in for consideration. This isn't something that Mr. Hillier and I think this is something that's do or die and it needs to be in here. So if it's causing more harm than good, I think it's reasonable to consider taking it out.
Well, it's confusing to me, so I don't know how my colleagues feel, but there are, I think, exceptions to it, but I think by and large it's captured in our honorarium policy, myself, but that's just me.
Okay, Councillor Schmidt-Rempel.
Go ahead.
Further to that, again, the resolution from the March 7th, 2023 council meeting was passed to decline the receipt of, I'm just reading exactly what was in there, decline the receipt of compensation honoraria for their duties on council, BCCs, as well as any other external BCCs they are appointed to as a member of council, and direct administration to prepare amendments to bylaw 6125 council code of conduct bylaw to preclude members of city council from receiving additional compensation for their roles on various councils and external BCCs. So again, to Mr. Faust's comments, again, not something we came up with, but just included in here as directed from the March 7th, 2023 council meeting. And happy to remove it if that's no longer the direction of council.
I couldn't recall. I don't think I had a copy of that resolution. Maybe it's in all the reading I missed, because I wasn't sure if it was a referral to this committee or if that had been passed at council. I wasn't clear. So thank you.
Go ahead, Councillor Schmidt-Rempel.
Thank you very much. And to tie into what Councillor Carlson is saying, I do find I agree that 14.3 for myself is also confusing. I've been recently appointed to one of the Alberta municipalities committees. It does come with an honorarium, but I was appointed because I applied, and Alberta municipalities appointed me, and they appointed me because I am a councillor with Lethbridge City Council. So technically this exempts me from it, but does it? And I find this confusing. So if this were to be removed, I would certainly be comfortable with removing it, because there is a possibility that we are appointed to boards, committees, and commissions just by being members of council for things that we've applied for that we recognize as valuable to the organization and to the residents of the city of Lethbridge. So I guess, and the only other question I have, again, Councillor Carlson stole from me, would be the costing on an integrity commissioner. So while I'm certainly in favor of moving forward with the code of conduct that includes the integrity commissioner and then looking at removing 14.3, I would certainly want costing before that was ever finally approved and gone to second or third readings. I would really want to see the costing on what that would be to the city of Lethbridge.
So
I think she means suspected costing, because we have no idea what the costing would be.
Suspected, expected, projected.
Yeah. So I think what I could share on that, so again, we have done some research on other municipalities and what we would see there. And again, I think I would stress that we would view this as a third-party contracted individual, not a city employee. So going through a competitive procurement process, that's when we would have some more definitive answers on costs. What we do see in other municipalities across Alberta, the budgeted amounts that we're seeing are, so Medicine Hat and Red Deer, 100,000, 105,000. So in that range are the budgeted amounts. seeing 185,000 for Edmonton, so a little bit more in the larger municipalities, 30,000 budgeted in Wood Buffalo. So there is a bit of a range. The structure of those contracts, to the comment earlier, typically an hourly rate, somewhere in the $200 to $300 range. And some do have an annual retainer, some do not. So some is just the fees, others are not. So there's a bit of a range, but just to give you an idea, again, a Medicine Hat or a Red Deer would have around that $100,000 budgeted item. That's not to say that's what it actually equals each year, because that is dependent on the volume of complaints that the Integrity Commissioner is investigating.
You were looking like you had something to say, Mr. Lowen, and now you've shut your mic off. Is there something you wanted to add, or was it answered?
He covered what I was going to add, and the only thing I was going to say is I could share a little bit of information in camera, but I think what's been said, nothing I could say in camera would add to what's been said publicly. So.
Okay. Mr. Faust, did you have something to add as well? Oh.
You beat me to it.
Okay. Wow, we have some people who are really simpatico today. I know we keep focusing on the Integrity Commissioner, but the Integrity Commissioner is a result of. The real question is, do we want to only allow the 9 of us to complain about each other, or do we want to have the Code of Conduct open to complaints from the public? And when we look across the province, we are the odd ones out right now, are we not, in that we only have kept this in-house about the 9 of us complaining about ourselves?
That is correct.
And when we look at why the province has brought down a code of conduct, and we have this because, 1, it's a good thing to have, and 2, we were told to have a code of conduct bylaw. When we look at the reason they did it, was the reason there to make sure that council is, basically, does it seem like the province wants these opened up to the public? And I know there's a gray area there, but is that the feeling that is coming across the province, is that these are most effective if they actually have anyone able to make a complaint?
I think you're seeing that across Alberta. You're seeing that across other provinces as well, that the move to having any individual being able to submit a complaint is where things appear to be moving.
And is it not true that likely the most difficult thing you could ever do is try to investigate your colleagues?
I think, yeah, I would say my initial answer to that would be yes. I think as well, depending on the nature of the complaint, you either may be almost investigating yourself, or be a witness as well to the event or the complaint, which again, from a procedural standpoint, would make it difficult for you to be even a witness to something, but then as well doing the investigation. So, for example, if the potential breach to the code of conduct happened during a council meeting, and all 9 members of council were there and either an active participant in said breach or again a witness to it, just from an overall procedural fairness, it presents difficulties and challenges in investigating something that you're a part of. So.
And isn't it also true that even though one of the biggest concerns is that there's going to be thousands of complaints, in reality, people who've opened it up to the public are not seeing that the number as large as they were concerned?
I think what we've seen from other municipalities, again, in the published results that they have, is we're not seeing thousands of complaints. I think the potential exception to that would be if there was a very public, blatant breach of the conduct. And what you may see in that instance is a number of complaints about the same thing. So it is, but that would still be one investigation. All of that just becomes part of the overall investigation. So you may receive 100 complaints because 100 people were watching the council meeting where the incident happened, but all of those just form one investigation. It's not 100 separate investigations.
So, and again, this is more philosophical and might be part of my debate. If we really want to be accountable to the people who elected us, we have to open this up to anyone making a complaint. And the cost of opening up to anyone making a complaint is an integrity commissioner.
I think that would be our recommendation, is if you were opening it up to any person, an integrity commissioner is integral to the process.
And it all holds us accountable to do our job the best as we can.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from the committee? All right. Oh, Councillor Carlson, please go right ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
I couldn't see that past everything.
That's right, and I enjoyed your questions that crept into debate, because I think they've convinced me overly that it is time to move forward, and I appreciate the answers because of the cost is not as onerous as I am concerned it could be. So I really... Exactly. And so I appreciate it. I do hope, however, that there is some movement on the AM resolution, because I think it just makes sense to have one central clearinghouse. And my question was going to be around, and I was hoping the mayor was here, if the mid-sized mayors or the 7 community had even talked about, we've done group purchasing power before, about creating our own. And I think that might be an approach to take as well. Anyways, that's not really what we're here for. It's just my spitballing ideas for future considerations. But thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, Mr. Westerson, do we have a motion that is being ready to be brought forward?
I think so.
Okay, may I have the motion?
He needed to explain something.
Why wasn't that actually on the mic? Okay, I have a motion from Councillor Carlson. Be it resolved that the Governance Standing Policy Committee recommend that Council, 1, provide first reading to Bylaw 6454, amendment to Bylaw 6125, Council Code of Conduct, is outlined in Attachment 1 to include an integrity commissioner except in Clause 2X, and 2, refer the matter to administration to develop a high-level budget for an integrity commissioner and to report to a Governance Standing Policy Committee meeting in Q2 2025 prior to second and third readings. And further be it resolved that the Governance Standing Policy Committee recommends City Council remove from the status of directed resolutions the new council policy, council post-employment item, as it was researched and not recommended to proceed by administration. And further be it resolved that the Governance Standing Policy Committee direct that the closed meeting discussions and documents with respect to the Bylaw 6454 amendment to Bylaw 6215, Council Code of Conduct, Council Code of Conduct remain confidential pursuant to Sections 24, Advice from Officials, and 27, Legal Privilege of the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act. I always love when we just kind of slip something in there. The status of directed resolutions. We haven't had any discussion. Does everybody understand what that is and what it entails?
Talk about
it. No, as long as we all understand, that's fine. Yes. I just always worry when there's something that seems omnibusy, that we're not trying to slip anything past members of committee.
And I did mean to speak to it in my preamble, Madam Chair.
And the floor is yours for your preamble.
And thank you for this. I do appreciate the work and the length of time we've dealt with this. The good news is, for me, I have now become an advocate for this, because I think it is the way to go. I was always more concerned about opening the floodgates and the costs that could be entailed by our corporation, but seeing that other communities have not seen those happen, I trust our public to not be overly frivolous with these. So I do support it. In regards to the status of directed resolution, council post-employment, I believe this was a referral from previous term of council to look at. I don't recall exactly when it came up, but I know there was some discussion about it, and I believe it was actually a recommendation which I found to be kind of, yes, Very, very, very rude. Because some of us have worked for the corporation in the past. If we get terminated by the electorate, we may want to have employment again in the future. And it may actually very well benefit the corporation. So I don't think we should be putting any limits on this. And I believe the member of council that brought this to our attention is no longer on council, so I don't see any concerns of removing this. We've looked at it, we've talked about it, and my personal opinion is it's rude. So I'd ask for my colleagues' support. Oh, further to this, I'm just wondering, we did have a closed session attachment.
That was the last part of the motion.
Oh, is it?
That we also directed the closed meeting.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. I just wanted to ensure that those will be forwarded to our colleagues for their information as well, because I found them quite useful. So with that, unless there's anything further, I will call for the vote.
Question's been called. All in favor? And that passes unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Hillier and Mr. Faust. I know it had required a lot of conversations with councillors to move this forward. And hopefully the other 5 do not think we are crazy at this point and actually will move this forward completely. So thank you for the work. We move now to submissions. Now, some of these submissions are for conversation, some are for discussion. The first one, 6.1, from Mr. Matthews, Succession Planning for Council. Mr. Matthews, is there anything that you would wish to highlight, or is it something that we should just move right to questions on? Or is it Councillor Carlson, since it originated with him?
I will leave it to Councillor Carlson if he wants to start, and then I can always add in if needed.
All right, Councillor Carlson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is, I think it's a very fulsome report. One of our colleagues isn't here, so I thought I'd use the word fulsome as often as possible. It is a fulsome report outlining the request that council supported some time ago to look at this. It's done a fairly in-depth look at communities around the province and across the country of how they've looked into this and how they do this sort of support. I think it's important to note that this sort of did arise, about 8 months ago, in a discussion with several members of council, including the mayor, about fairness and equity and how it seems elected officials sometimes get short shrift. We don't qualify for things like EI. I don't think we even get workman's comp if I fell down the stairs. Yeah, if I get pushed down the stairs for talking too long. There is no severance package. There is none of that, no transition. And many communities have recognized this and realize that it can come as quite a shock to councillors or the mayors if they are unsuccessful in election or choose to finish, that there is no other option for them. They have zero income and are forced to start over from scratch the day after the election. And other communities have seen this and have taken steps. One of the main reasons I would like to see this move forward is because I'm having conversations in community right now. We talked about the election quite a lot today with folks thinking about running, and there are some amazingly qualified folks out there who are interested, and they're overly concerned, especially as we'll talk about a bit later, the time commitment and workload for council, and that things have changed and you're no longer really able to work outside. I look at our council, our current council, I don't think there's one individual who works outside because we know the time commitment. And so there is concern of community members. If I put my name forward, I have to either shut down my business or retire or quit. And what do I do in 4 years? And so I think this is just a recognition of that. The world is changing, things are changing, the time commitment is changing, and I'll leave it there and open up for any questions or discussion.
Okay, obviously, I have to ask, there's no members of the public here to speak on this. No, Nick. And I know I've said this to Mr. Matthews before, something can be perfectly logical, and yet council can choose not to do it for whatever reason. And my difficulty with this is knowing the affordability crisis so many of our community members are going through. How can we in any way give ourselves more money? Like it's like how that to me is the issue, because there are people who $5 to have a cup of coffee outside, not that they've made at home, is something that they actually have to consider whether they have. And so is this not giving us an advantage that people don't have sometimes when they're laid off, et cetera, that we're giving to ourselves or would be giving to ourselves that others don't have? And so it's a question and a concern, Councillor Carlson. How,
I appreciate that, and it is what I tried to address in the preamble. It's actually, in my opinion, not. It's actually making it a bit more equitable. If an outside, somebody who's not an elected official gets terminated or laid off or is unable to work, there is employment insurance. There are severance packages. There are those types of things, by and large, in place for folks that aren't in place for elected officials. And so I think it's actually the opposite. I don't think it's giving us a leg up on anyone. I think it's evening the playing field is my reasoning, but I do understand always the concern.
all right, I don't see any, Councillor Schmidt-Rempel, you have a question or a concern or a comment or, let me push that button. There.
It's a comment to that as well, and certainly appreciating the concerns you have, Councillor Carlson, because I've thought about those as well. But then, what Councillor Carlson says to that point is, elected officials don't have a labor board to go to when they run into problems. They don't have a union to appeal to. They don't have the same sorts of resources and opportunities that are available to them when they don't get reelected, if they leave suddenly, anything like that. Now, this speaks to a transition allowance if they're not reelected. And really, when you start looking at from scratch, so if you've been on council 4 years, you've been out of the workforce for 4 years. You might be able to move into retirement at that time, but you might not be. You might be out and in an elected official position for 8 years, trying to get back into employment after that. And it takes a long time, particularly in this day and age, to seek out those employment opportunities that you might be eligible for, because really you have 2 years where you've served on council, and finding the employment that you might be eligible for or that somebody might take you on for could take 2 years. It could take a year. We know, just even from our graduate retention study that we recently had, we know from other employment reports in this area, if you want to stay in this area, those professional opportunities are few and far between. So I think this, again, like Councillor Carlson states, it does put us on an equal footing that when we decide to leave the public service, or they decide, or electors decide for us, it puts us on an equal footing to start again out in the job market. And I didn't support this at first, but I can certainly see a need for municipal officials to have that consideration as they're considering running, as they've been elected, as they're considering transitioning out. And yeah, just those comments. But I certainly appreciate what you have to say too, especially when we look at the affordability at this time.
Okay, I think we've all asked our questions and had our discussions. So Councillor Carlson, it is your motion. I will read it. Be it resolved that the Governance Standing Policy Committee recommend that Council, 1, approve the amendment to CC 10, City Council Remuneration and Benefits Policy as provided in Attachment 1, with funding for any potential transition allowance to come from the existing operating budget. Councillor Carlson.
Thank you. Appreciate the questions. It is my joy of committee, because we do get to be a little less formal, a little more philosophical. And I appreciate the discussion. I would like to see our colleagues support this as well, so I'm hoping the committee will forward it to them. With that, I'll just call for the vote.
Question's been called. All in favor? And opposed? Okay, that goes forward, recommended to Council. All right. 6.2, the workload expectation and resourcing for elected officials. We have a lot of discussion stuff today. It seems to be a philosophical meeting. And so this one, there is no one attached to it. There is no motion suggested yet. Councillor Schmidt-Rempel, this came through from your work. I know that it ended up here, I believe, though, from Councillor Middleton Hope sending it here with the idea of further discussion. Is there further discussion? Is there, or do we want to lay this to rest? Where are we thinking? What are we conversing with this? Councillor Carlson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think a lot of discussion around this was to ensure that, and I don't want to speak for Councillor Middleton Hope because he's not here, but if I recall his discussion, it was that he was misled by members of council when they encouraged him to run for council. Oh, it's one day a week, and he called BS, and so he really wanted council. And John, if you're listening, I hope I'm paraphrasing you well. He wanted council to ensure that we had a fulsome discussion. So we ensured that anyone out there, it goes back to my last discussion around the transition allowance, is I want everyone to be aware that this is a full-time job, whether we call it that or not, right? To do this job properly, I challenge anyone to not call it a full-time job. And I think that's what John was saying, is that we need to ensure that in the orientation process, which will be starting fairly quickly if we start taking nominations January 1, that people are aware that this is, you are traveling a lot, you are booking off weeks and weeks at a time to do budget and CIP meetings. There's a lot. It may, over the course of the year, yes, maybe it does average out to 25 hours a week, but most of the weeks it's 60, and then luckily a couple in summer and Christmas, it's 0. Okay, and it's still not 0 because of all the engagement we have to do at Christmas parties, etc. So I think that's just the discussion. So I'm wondering if we have an idea through you to maybe Mr. Westerson, when this committee is going to be discussing the orientation process, because I know we steward that, or at least we have in the past, and maybe we include this discussion at that time.
At this point in time, and Ms. Hilford's not here, and nor is Mr. Sarsfield. However, I don't believe that is going to be something before this committee until at least the end of Q1 of 2025. Okay. December would be far too early, considering we're just considering an election bylaw today.
Yeah, so it looks like we've got time, but I think in fairness to council, I don't know if I guess he's still councillor. I was going to call him John for now since he's not here. Fairness to John, who wanted this discussed to inform future councillors or people running for council of the time commitment. And I think the mayor as well has put that down. When I was acting or deputy mayor and I looked at the mayor's calendar, you better put yourself down for 2 full-time jobs. So I think we need to have a blunt discussion, and if we can put it off till the orientation discussion, I think that would satisfy Councillor Middleton Hope.
The other reason I think we need to be discussing this, we just passed a motion the other day, recommended to council, a motion that if you get money from from the city, we're going to expecting better governance of your board, that you need to be doing professional development, et cetera. And it would not be a smart idea, nor the right thing to do, for us not to expect equally of us. We are a governing board. If we are not doing our professional development, if you are not walking into these meetings prepared, I had somebody complain about that today. They're like, he's very upset that, there are times when it's obvious that a counselor has not read their material in advance. And this person is saying, isn't that your responsibility? And it is our responsibility. And all of that stuff takes time. And so if we are asking other organizations to up their governance, we cannot expect it of council as well. And that it adds expectations to the role of counselors. And so, yes, I think this is a conversation that we need to be having about, whether it's audit, governance, whatever one, there is a lot of work behind the scenes. And I know I've said this to Mr. Cool, politics gets you elected. Governance is the job. And if you're not going to be doing good governance, you're not doing this job in a way that the community, I think, needs. And good governance is reading everything, preparing everything, doing the research, et cetera. And that time commitment is very different than just being at a meeting, in my opinion. So yeah, anybody running for the office needs to know that. Councillor Schmidt-Rempel?
And just to follow up on what both of you have said here, I think it's also important that we talk about what each of us is doing and what we consider essential to our roles as elected officials, and make sure that we are exchanging that information with each other, as well as reporting back to each other on those external boards, committees, and commissions that we are working on. We're not always great with our communication, and I think that ties back to a review of ourselves as a board. And this speaks to that, what that time commitment is, but as well as what we are all working on, and make sure that we have, for lack of a better description, a common job description. There might be things that someone's working on that we never considered, and we can start partnering and finding efficiencies amongst each other on as well.
Mr. Westerson and I were having a sidebar about the motion, and what I am going to suggest, the motion that I'm hearing is to postpone this to the conversation around the orientation. And Mr. Westerson always makes me sound way smarter than I do in those motions, but essentially is that what I am hearing, is to continue this conversation, but to link it with the developing the orientation for the future council.
In conjunction with council orientation? Perfect,
Yes.
thank you.
All right, and this comes from Councillor Schmidt-Rempel. Be it resolved that the Governance Standing Policy Committee postpone the item, even though we already have full discussion, to a future meeting of the Governance Standing Policy Committee in conjunction with council orientation. Councillor Schmidt-Rempel.
Thank you very much. I don't know that there are any other comments to make on this, but if either of my colleagues have some, I would encourage them to do so now. Otherwise, I will call for the vote.
Question's been called. All in favor? And we won't forever hold our peace because we'll be having another conversation. All right, moves us to inquiries and responses. 7.1 is here because you had a question around the sports and recreation policy, Councillor Schmidt-Rempel, which was absolutely correct because we actually had the wrong version of it up in that. The corrected version had inadvertently not been added, and the old version had. And so what we now have is the corrected version. And so we have a new motion, be it resolved that the Governance Standing Policy Committee recommend that City Council reaffirm policy CC 31, the correct one, sport and recreation policy as an attachment 1, which has now been updated.
Perfect.
So Councillor Schmidt-Rempel, that's your motion.
Thank you very much, Mr. Matthews, for looking into this. And it's good to know I wasn't imagining things when I pulled that one out. So I have nothing further other than thank you for the correct policy.
Question's been called. All in favor? Perfect. Thank you for whoever found that. Now, this next one came to us from Agenda Review Committee. I know you had submitted this inquiry on the post-secondary retention study and transit services. The concern from ARC, as I understand it, and Acting Mayor, you were there, is that it might be too much work for staff just to be an inquiry, that it might be an OBM. So the reason it was sent here was not just for the individual one, but to have some conversation if we at some point think there needs to be sort of bumpers, guidelines for what is an inquiry and what requires an OBM. Is it the level of staff work involved? Is it, whether there's a decision in it or what? Because we have set out how to do inquiries, but we have never set out what's an inquiry and whether an inquiry is, like what goes to 311, what makes it up to an inquiry because it's, responding to a large member of the public, and what actually goes to an OBM. And so, Acting Mayor, we'll start with you because you probably can bring forward the conversation that was held at ARC that sends it here, or at least some of it, as long as it wasn't in closed session, and then we can, go from there. Go ahead, Acting Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think you've covered it. There was a discussion at ARC that you're correct. I was listening. Oh, okay. Because yes, we do have inquiries, but there's never been parameters put around them, and so this council has been using them more and more extensively because they're fairly new. I think they're only about 3.5 years old in the process, or the formalized process. And some of the ones that have come forward have caused staff a lot of work. I know there was one just recently. Years usually. No. Usually, there was one that I know took several months or weeks or months to get through the process. And I know personally of many meetings that happened back and forth. And it was brought up that, perhaps if this is just of an interest to Jeff, Jeff better test it by his colleagues and say, do you all think this is worth spending $100,000 of staff time on? And if I can get 4 friends to vote with me, then yes. But if it's causing a lot of work, and I think it's just us, we didn't know. We're like, this is interesting to me. I'm going to put forward an inquiry. And so this one, this was on the school. Yes.
The post-secondaries retention study and transit services, and it was a question that came out of one of the Coffee with Councils that Councillor Croson and I had, where they were looking for an update on where the post-secondary retention study was at, particularly in and around initiatives that involved transit. And since we had that study, since we had the question from the students, I pulled the information from the study and put it into an inquiry.
Excellent, and thank you. And when we went through this ARC, which for anyone listening is a gender review committee, it was, the questions were asked, how long would this take? And I think the thought was that this committee may want to, because we are governance and we did create the procedure bylaw, look at some parameters around the inquiry process, similar to what we did with the recent resolution regarding the budget process, that it was started with a certain idea. It may have had creep. And so do we want to limit it or do we want to keep it wide open? So perhaps rather than dealing with this specific inquiry right now, we put it forward as a general that this committee in Q1 2025 review the inquiry process and what parameters there should be on it. Because some are quite easy, right? How much did the bike lanes cost? Hopefully, Joel can say $8 immediately. But if the question is, how many kilometers of bike lane do we have? How many are appropriate? How many are other communities doing? That means a staff member going out and collecting all that data and connecting with different departments and several. So I think that is the intent or the ask from ARC, is for us to develop parameters.
So, no, I like that. I'm just looking process. Now, do we want to do this? Because I assume we can. We could do this sort of as, add it to another agenda as we're going to set aside half an hour to, work together to create it. Or do we want to ask one of the three of us to, take this away and come back with a straw man for the rest of us to look at? Or, we could have, basically we could three of us could go have coffee and come up with this, like, what's the process? Do we want to go just have a coffee and come up with a guideline that we bring back? How do we want to move ahead on this, is the question I have right now.
My original suggestion at ARC was to let the city manager throw it back to council. If one comes across his desk and he goes, oh, this is going to take 100 hours, I want council's vote on this. If you direct me to do this, I will do the work. So I'm wondering if that's...
And that is an option I think the city manager already has. The city manager can take something and say, this is not an inquiry, this has to be an OBM. Am I correct on that, Mr. Westerson?
I like that.
Currently looking at the procedure bylaw, section 118 indicates that, and the city manager is online. Oh, I do see his hand up, so excuse me, city manager, if I'm stealing your words at all, but I do know that the procedure bylaw does indicate anything that does require funding to answer, which includes staff time, resources, whatever, over and above $2,000 that it may be council directing to occur.
So is that enough of a bumpers, the 2,000 outline, Mr. Brierley, or would you like more of a guidance set up by this committee for that? So go ahead, Mr. Brierley.
Yeah, that was exactly it. You know, the $2,000 is, it's, as Councillor Carlson alluded to, there was one that we went a little too deep on. It seemed like an inquiry and we ended up spending a lot of time on it. And then when staff looked at this one, they identified that this is more report to ensure we're providing the right answer and something that might be of interest to council as a whole. Then council as a whole might say, is this something we want staff to spend time on? Because that would quite often mean that something else is being put on the side burner to complete this. So bring it back into that structure process for decision making. And in ARC, the example I gave is if Councillor Carlson wants to know where the light switch is, none of council's, it's not decision making information. I'll just say here it is. If it's an inquiry, that the response is simple, somewhat cut, paste, an hour, 2 hours worth of work, easy enough, that's an inquiry. And then when we get into the stuff that takes multiple hours and some research and multiple staff, that's more report level that we would bring back to say, council as a whole, is this something you would like us to work on? Does that help?
So the question is the 2,000 level, are we good with that? Is that all we need, just making sure we actually apply it? Or are there other bumpers that you would like to see around these as to, I'm not sure right now exactly what, but does that give you enough leeway to push things back to the councillor and say, please do this as an OBM instead? Or do you need or would you want to see other guidelines to make your life easier?
Yeah, the only other thing that the 2,000 level is one thing. If there's things, and I'm not suggesting this is one by any means, some things that an individual councillor might want, but other councillors might say, well, why are we spending time on that? Why did we do that? That is just below that threshold. Then those are subjective, and it would be really hard to put guidelines around that, where I would say, okay, bring this back. Let's make sure this is, and typically I'd take that to ARC. Is this of interest to council as a whole? And this one, because there's probably some work and volume and a number of discussions that this hit the threshold of this is probably more of a report, which takes time and scheduling.
Okay. So it sounds like the process is there. It sounds like the process is both the money level, but also how broadly the category is. So it's sounding more and more like there's nothing we need to do except make our colleagues aware of this better. That, here's the two processes, is the OBM and the inquiry. If it meets this criteria, please, consider an OBM. If it meets this and this criteria, please consider an inquiry. All of these will then also be double checked by ARC, and they may disagree with your decision, like that one councillor who thought that, and ARC and the city manager will have final decision.
That's exactly, yeah, and that's where, if nothing else, this is a good conversation to have a check-in to say, we still on the same page? Does this work? And if we are, there's our answer, and we just keep going the way we're going.
All right, and we already know we're trying to do more updates for our colleagues, so just remind me that when we do updates, governance will just give a brief little feedback on on this discussion, and just saying, we want you to be able to get whatever information you need to do your job, but these are kind of the process so that, again, not overwhelming staff and getting you the right answers that you need.
Exactly. Yep.
Okay. Well, thank you, Mr. Brierly, for popping in.
No problem. Thank you.
All right. Yes, please go ahead, Councillor Schmidt-Rempel.
Thank you. Because I wasn't part of the ARC meeting and you're talking about the 2,000 level, I'm not quite familiar what that is, where that came from.
It's in the...
Okay, so if somebody could just outline what that is?
Mr. Westerson.
If I heard you correctly, you're asking where it is or what it is?
It's in the procedure bylaw.
It's in the
but what
procedure
is
bylaw,
that?
yeah.
Staff time will be $2,000 or
Determines
more.
that our administrative inquiry, will require funding above $2,000. The city manager must provide a statement about that, and this was one that was discussed, and the Agenda Review Committee, I believe, kind of did that preemptively as well.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Just so that everybody does. Yeah, just so the public understands, though, what that is, where it came from, and why this would be looked at differently. Thank you very much, Mr. Westerson.
Councillor Carlson.
And thank you. And I think a good discussion with our colleagues around this would be helpful, because there has been creep, as there is. We are a curious lot. We like to understand things. We do, but sometimes it's not useful information. And I believe the inquiry process, when we first laid it out, was supposed to be items of a community-wide, because we didn't want to spend too much time on them or effort on them or debate on them. It was things like, Mr. City Manager, Dutch elm disease is spreading rampant. Can you provide a quick update? It was those types of community-wide inquiries that we were trying to get that everyone in the community needed to hear on things that are much more specific, like several of the ones we've had of late have been like, one neighbor wants to know why next door neighbor has X and Y, and that could just be a phone call to the city manager at some point, or a chat with Ms. Gehring at some point. I think the inquiry process has maybe gotten just a bit too broad. I'll just put it that way.
Well, remember the inquiry process at one point was on the fly, and we could grill administration on any question we wanted right there. And we decided that might not actually be useful, so we went to the written inquiry. And so at one point, it could be any question that was actually on your mind at that time. So it has become a little more of a different process. I still really do like grilling admin whenever we feel like it, but I think they prefer the written inquiry process. So that's where we are right now, is something more formal. Hey, guess what?
We're done.
Well, we didn't actually do a motion on that one. And I don't think we need one. Is it not even for information, right? It was just sent to us. And yeah, so we had the discussion. We'll do an update with the next one just to remind our colleagues. And we're adjourned. Run, people, run. Oh, and one last thing. Now, I appreciate having all the department heads, but I just want to remind you guys again that you don't have to come to every SPC unless you have something on the agenda. So if you guys do have something that it takes your time more important to be than at here, and if you can pop down for your agenda items, remember, we love to see you. We always appreciate having you here, but there is not an expectation that department heads have to be here the whole meeting unless it is something you're involved with. I don't want to use your time in ways that may not need to be used. So just keep that in mind when you look at the agenda and decide if you have to be here. Thank you all.